Hey folks, welcome to the next episode of The Main Scoop. I'm Greg Lotko, and joining me today is my co-host, Dan Newman. Good to see you, Dan.
Greg, it's good to be back.
All right, low five. There we go. All right, our conversation today, we're talking about bolstering workforce resiliency and succession planning. So we touched on skills before, but focusing on succession planning means you're really thinking about where your organization's going. You're thinking about the demographics of the people that you have. You're not just waiting for somebody to tell you they're retiring and they're going somewhere else, but you've got a plan. You've got a methodical approach.
Yeah, let's be, pretty candid, Greg. We're in a very interesting inflection as it comes to business, technology, IT. We've got probably the fastest revolution we've seen. People love to talk about the fourth industrial and the fifth industrial revolution. And you and I love on this show, we like to kind of, we have varying opinions on the spectrum of how fast AI is accelerating, how much but I think we all agree, if you even just go back to two and a half years ago to that first sort of chat GPT moment to now how fast it's proliferated. We went from, oh my gosh, this thing can sort of give us a contextual answer to now we're hearing about agents that can run. They can do work. And by the way, for the first time in several industrial revolutions, we're hearing about a workforce being potentially impacted by technology that hits the white collar. Whereas before, it's always been like the assembly line is going to get disrupted or robots are going to fill our orders from Amazon. Now we're hearing they're going to do all the marketing that we used to do.
Yeah, but
we're hearing that. So it's changing the workforce.
But the reality is, if you think about through history, every time new things have happened with technology, not even just since computer technology, that technology has taken the easier tasks, the more rote tasks, the repetitive tasks away from humans, from people, and workers have had to upskill to move up the food chain. So do we really think that's that much different, or are these agents more like the Matrix?
Well, I think the world is sort of trying to discern this right now of whether or not this inflection is different, because what you said is something I like to say, which, we sometimes agree, sometimes we don't, but is that every industrial revolution has created more, not less jobs.
So joining us today, we have Bola Rotibi. She is the Chief of Enterprise Research at CCS Insight. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you here. So you've heard us kind of talking a bit about sustainable workforces and succession planning. Obviously, where the world's going with AI has an impact on that. But we have to balance two things. We have to balance, I think, training the resource on the right technologies to keep a space going, thriving, producing. But we also have to recognize AI is not going to do everything. So you've done some studying of building a sustainable workforce around the mainframe.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, the thing about it is from the succession planning is that let's kind of take the technology out of this, because ultimately succession planning is about people. It's about sort of managing the fact that you've got people who are able to kind of cross skills, right? Look at different types of technology, and it's about how they are, the mindset. It's about making sure that you have resiliency and redundancy. The challenge that we always have is that we talk about infrastructure, sort of on a technical level, and we think, operations, we need to have redundant systems, and we think about the mainframe being this kind of highly utilized.
I think about the Matrix too. Though.
Yeah, well, we all think about the Matrix.
Twice now on this.
We all think about the Matrix and the mainframe. But the mainframe is highly utilized, and I think sometimes people think, this great platform, it's just running in the background, and it's doing what it's doing, and it's doing it well.
But it's not without people.
It's not without
without care and feeding.
It is, absolutely. And the fact is that the really good organizations start to think about this in a really structured way. Because at the end of the day, in the same way that you have to have resilience of sort of systems, you have to have human resilience. I mean, what if somebody kind of sort of retires? What if somebody, something else happens?
So in your research that you focused quite a bit, it seems like, on sort of how they're thinking about the technology, things like repatriating workloads, like where we started here on AI, but you also looked across generations.
Yes, we did.
Which is very interesting. And Greg, I wrote a book called The Millennial CEO.
I did not.
Yeah. So we're just going to make this about that. But anyways.
Are you going to
I
sign
was
a
going
copy
to
for
say,
me?
the millennials are now in They're in the ascendancy. Exactly.
I
We've
guess
done
that.
some other research, which actually, when we look at the IT kind of senior IT leadership, and we found out that actually, when we look at the breakdown, something like 28% are Gen X, which is kind of like the 55s to kind of 65s, and then the millennials, which is 60% of the senior leaders now. So they're the ones actually in charge of the operational side.
You're the other 40%.
And that's like the Gen Z, which are kind of like, I think after 1997, they're the ones who are like the 14%, 12% were Gen Z. So they're kind of starting to come in. They're kind of more, they're progressive. They want to do sort of things, sort of, they have vision, but at the same time, they don't necessarily have all the budgetary powers. That's still in the hands of kind of the Gen X. They're kind of thinking about compliance and risk, and millennials are really the kind of day-to-day operations. So I think when you start thinking about those kind of like the demographics of the skill, the leadership, that's what you need to start thinking about when you think about succession planning.
So that definitely impacts their perspective on succession
Absolutely.
planning, right?
Absolutely.
Because they don't have the experience of having to go through those transitions, and they're maybe focused on it from one aspect, operational risk, versus thinking about the longer term.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is, the challenge that a lot of organizations will have is maybe capturing all that skills and all that knowledge and that experience, and making sure that that's still available for the generations as they grow, as they kind of evolve and sort of move out or move up, and the other sections become the bigger. Because today's Gen Z is going to be tomorrow's millennial.
Well, it is interesting to think that felt like 5 years ago that millennials were like this up and coming, and now they've taken, you said 60%?
60% in our survey.
So in that survey though, so you have this interesting kind of progression of the of this demographic. But from a technological standpoint, just a quick backup, because what were some of the biggest things you're seeing in terms of the progress, succession planning,
Yeah,
on
I
the
think one
technological
of the things that we found, that we actually had some very common, sort of concerns actually. In fact, I think the challenge that a lot of organizations have is that terminology.
So words matter, how you say things.
Absolutely.
You have to deliver the message in a way that people are going to be able to hear it.
Absolutely. That is one of the things actually that's really important. The other thing is really about having to organize, how you organize people, and having sort of the fact that they didn't have, sort of accountability, ownership. That was the other, the challenge that a lot of people have, not having the ownership, and sort of like, who owns succession planning? What's, where is, who's driving this? Is it HR? Is it IT? Is it senior leadership? Is it, so I think that's one of the things. And then really sort of like passing on skills, that was the other thing. So we have this kind of, the really good guys, or the companies that really sort of thought about this, had this notion of two in a box system. And that was really, because there are a lot of people say, oh, there's a lot of old people leaving,
So most people try to think outside the box. So they wanted to put two people in the box.
But not just any two people.
Okay.
Two types of people, someone who's a bit more experienced and someone who's junior coming up. So in fact,
So different perspectives.
Exactly. You're cross-pollinating ideas, experiences, and making sure that what's actually happening is that you're transferring skill sets. So, and the thing is that they were finding actually is that the more experienced practitioners are finding actually, do you know what? I'm scaling my knowledge set. I'm actually passing on. And so therefore they feel that they're actually engaged, and it's really exciting. And then the younger people who are coming on, they're learning something, and they're actually also passing on skills that they're seeing as well. Like, sort of like when we often see sort of being able to use newer technologies, newer tools, for instance, like, Visual Code as a solution, or some of the open source
So
tools
it's funny,
or Zoe.
you kind of started by saying, words matter, you got to speak with clarity, but then you recognize that across the different generations, they may not speak or see things the same or have the same experience.
Yeah.
So you got two in a
bring-
box, which forces them to come together and start to be able to translate and interpret and talk to each other. And then you got to tools, right? And
Yeah.
you're looking at that as, let's have them use a common approach, a common tool
Absolutely.
set,
Yeah.
versus each bringing their own without the other understanding it.
And the whole point is that really what you're trying to do in all of this is that the big magical word that is, I would say, is probably the biggest R is resiliency, right? because we talk about resilient systems. We're always thinking either backups or making sure that if something goes wrong, there's something else that will step in the place. We don't talk about human resiliency. And that is one of the kind of important things that succession planning is really fundamental, is based on, is human resiliency as well as system resiliency, technology resiliency. And I think that is a common ground.
And the human resiliency there is from different perspectives, right? I mean, you have the people that are later into their career that you want them to still be there, still be going, still be passionate, and put that passion into training the next generation or the newer to the platform. And then you want the resiliency of that person newer coming in who maybe doesn't know everything yet to realize, hey, I don't know everything, but I'm learning something every day. So they both sides need resiliency.
So I sense, Bola, that resilience is this thematic, right? It kind of, it traverses technology, people, which has always been transformative.
Yeah.
But in the end, these companies that you're talking to, they want answers. They want decisions. So from all the surveying you're doing, you've come up with a succession plan.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how this sort of resilience feeds into this plan that you've put together, because I think all the listeners, customers out there probably want to hear a little bit about how to do this and what's going to work.
Absolutely. And the thing is, what I wanted to say is that sometimes when we sort of say, succession, we think it's going to be young people, the next generation, but actually, it's actually skill sets, different skill sets, people that you have inside your organization. And I think that's the challenge, is that people always think, oh, how are we going to get new people, sort of equals young people? No, what we don't have, what many organizations don't have an issue with or a problem, is the people side. They have people all around their organization. They have people who are doing different technologies, who are different, sort of their Linux players, their cloud, their DBAs. And it's really about thinking about succession is actually, how do you make sure that your workforce works for you as an organization? And that is the resiliency that I'm talking about. So when we think about succession planning, is that how do you ensure that you bring in more, different types of people around the organization? How do you identify them? And how do you make sure that you are able to have them transition into sort of the technology of the mainframe? And I think that is really, because at the end of the day, they held a whole host of, sort of organizational knowledge. You don't want to lose that. But the fact is, and I think that's one of the things that when we sort of ask organizations, when they start thinking about it. So it's first of all, recognizing that your workforce as an organization is your biggest asset. And basically, they've got all of these people with lots and lots of skills, and they know your knowledge of your organization. So the fact is that giving them an opening into other paths. And the thing is, we talk about the mainframe here, but this is succession planning for the IT organization at the end of the day. This is not just about the mainframe. The mainframe is a first-class citizen of the IT estate, as is when we think about cloud, we think about on-premises, we think about all the different things. And the point is, for a lot of organizations, they want to make they want to take all of that with them. They want to make sure that they are getting the most of what they've invested in.
So you broadened that there, and I want to broaden it a little bit more. So you've been an analyst for 25 years.
Yes.
You've been in the IT space for 35.
Yes.
We've all heard the phrase that history continues to repeat itself. And you talked about, there's generally good concepts or good approaches for succession planning. But I'm curious, in that 35 years, what patterns have you seen across the industry?
Oh, what patterns? Good Lord. Well, the one big thing I would say is that technology is an asset. That is the most important thing. It really is. But it's the people aspect that is the real. I can tell you that in all the jobs that I have done, and I've been an engineer and a developer and an analyst, and I've spoken to lots of different organizations, and successful ones and ones who haven't been as successful. And one of the things that the common, factor that goes into that is the fact that it's people. It's the human factor.
The successful ones realize the people are what create or use the technology to drive the value.
And they use that as an asset, and they mine from it. And they have the right kind of training programs in place. Because the other thing is that, look, let's face it, when we think about the world today, we're in challenging times, macroeconomics and everything like that. So people are kind of looking after the pennies, right? And the first thing that whenever sort of says, oh, I've got a cup, what gets cut? But training, first of all, because everyone's like, oh. But the fact is that training is really, really important. And in fact, actually, one of the things I've seen over all that time, if you don't train people, then they will leave because they actually want to go. No one wants to sit in a job where A, I don't have training, B, I don't have a community, B, there's no prospects, you have no forward thinking, no career path for me.
Yeah.
So actually all of those things, sorry.
No, I was going to say, Bola, have you ever seen, it's a pretty classic leadership meme, but it says, the CFO walks into the CEO's office, and what if we, invest and train all these people and they leave, and the CEO looks back and says, what if we don't train them and they stay?
And I thought of something else. I thought of something else listening to this with succession planning, and we know AI is everywhere, and I know you're very bullish on using it in every way and any way we can. I'm curious relative to succession planning. If you ask an AI to do succession planning for itself, would it ever recommend replacing itself with a different AI? Or would the AI recommend you just scale it up more? But the reason this question occurs to me is we think about human evolution in business, humans' evolution more finitely in their career, right? And we know that the less successful people protect their knowledge, they don't share it, they don't want anybody else to understand how it is that they do what they do, and they tend not to advance, succeed, or achieve. And we know that the ones who do are the ones who say, hey, I'm always trying to work myself out of a job. I want to make my job easier. I want to teach somebody else to do it more effectively. And then I can go on to the next thing. And it makes me wonder.
Will Claude 3.5 recommend GPT-4?
Right. Will an AI say, hey, succession planning for me should be to replace me? Or will the AI recommend that you invest in training, more training of the AI?
A technical answer, and I'd love to hear yours, would be that, you have both agent-to-agent protocols and you have mixture of experts that would actually have some ability to understand what they're good at. You have small models and larger models, and models that are vertically cut or do specific things. So technically speaking, could a model recognize that there's another model that could do something better? I'm imagining that's probably being developed.
Could it or would it?
But would it? I mean,
Well, that depends
I
on
don't know.
what kind of.
What does it open the door?
Yeah, but what depends on what kind of constraints you put on.
2001?
I mean, this is very esoterical conversation because I think, hold on, we are moving away from the human aspect because actually at the end of the day, you sort of say, well, I need to train, replace my job, train somebody who can do my job. But the fact is, what is the workforce, right? What do people really enjoy? They enjoy imparting knowledge. Even, like you think about developers, even the developers with the egos, they just basically want to tell you, hey, this is what I've done, it's great and it's brilliant, and they want followers. And my point of this is about, ultimately, people want to share. I don't believe that, you might get somebody who comes in and says, well, no, I just want to keep my, because they've been taught that way. They've become that person because
they saw it modeled and they
exactly,
emulated it.
because the company has basically said, I'm going to reward you based on this, and that is not the kind of that's not the kind of behavior that you want to really encourage. You want to encourage.
So the system and the environment has to reward and encourage the behavior to ensure you get the reaction.
And you have to have the people who are committed at the top to say, do you know what? I'm going to trust your workforce. I want the best for you, actually, because actually I haven't done the hours or the maths, how many times you spend at work. But the fact is, and also people want to come up with ideas and they want to see those ideas work. They want to be part of something that's successful, but also, even if it isn't successful, they want to learn and then they want to go on and make it better. Now, that's a mindset, but the organization is responsible for that mindset, that culture.
And you look at when you recruit, right? You can recruit for talent, you can recruit for skills, but the most successful people are when you're aligning the culture of the person with the organization.
Bola, that was a really thought-provoking conversation. Years of sitting on your side of the table and then, of course, sitting on this side of the table, looking at sort of that human and technology aspect. And by the way, I think oftentimes the human part is a little underspoken. It's underrepresented. And we find in every study I've done, so it sounds like you could match this, is that companies move very quickly when they can get the people part right.
Yeah.
Now, we probably all slightly sit somewhere different in the end of this conversation, but it was very provocative in exactly how much the technology shift is going to change that. But I do believe in the immediate future, people are still incredibly critical. I think in the long term, they will be important. I think there's just a lot of unknowns as to the impact that AI will have. But I want to, absolutely say thank you so much for being part of this episode of The Main Scoop. Great episode. We'll make sure that in the show notes we put out some of that research so people can read the work that you've done. And, hopefully sometime in the near future, we'll get you back here on The Scoop.
Thank you very much. Real pleasure, guys.
Awesome having you.
Really, really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of The Main Scoop. For Greg Lotko and myself, we appreciate it, and we'll see you again on an episode very soon.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.